That's important. If we can submit joint maps, it sends an even stronger message. Also coordinating testimony, that's something that we talked about in our meeting, collaborative meeting in November, is training our community members to have maybe the same message as they're testifying before the commission, so that they're setting forth certain guiding principles that they're adhering to, and so everyone will all be presenting that same message.
Okay, and our final question, and the train's on time. Last December, Latino voters filed a lawsuit challenging the City of Compton's at-large election system. That case, Gonzalez v. City of Compton. Compton City Council is African American. No Latino has been elected to the Compton City Council since at least 1999. What new challenges does this lawsuit present in light of our conversation this afternoon?
I'll start. It certainly, to me, epitomizes where I think we are in 2011 with redistricting, in so much as we can identify those districts that have historically been represented by African Americans that have a growing Latino population. When I heard about this case, I harked back to several sort of political science books that I had, and just thoughts about that, as well as sort of a gut reaction to how I felt about it. And on one hand, certainly I can imagine that the African American leadership that's there, that's at large for the City of Compton, believes that they have probably fought for the last 40 years plus to secure those kinds of seats when it was a majority white community at that time. And so that power and that sense of legacy of opening the doors is something that they're very proud of. At the same time, I have family that lives in the City of Compton. I visit the City of Compton regularly. I've lived there before, and know that there is a growing Latino population there that cannot be ignored. I would say that, certainly I'm disappointed that the African American leadership there could not figure out a way to ensure that they are potentially representing the needs of the Latino community there. I imagine the people who are there now probably don't remember what it was like to fight for those seats when it was an all-white community. So I would, implore them to think about that and what that experience must have been like. And again, I can't imagine that this lawsuit is able to go forward unless there is clearly some condition or consideration that the Latino community feels like potentially there's no one there who understands their particular issues or interests as it relates to local government in the City of Compton. So I think that it's certainly one of those complicated, dilemmas that we're facing. How can we make sure the Latino community is organized, has the opportunity to participate, and that they've got real clear representation, whether it's an African American person or not, but certainly the ability to be able to participate at the highest levels in City of Compton government.
I think we need to be cognizant of the way the media is portraying this legal challenge. The media loves to be divisive, in particular when it comes to the different races, and it's being portrayed in some cases as a black versus brown issue. And that's very popular in the local media to portray things in that way. But I think if you go back to it, the actual complaint doesn't lay out that we are suing African American council members. It's challenging the electoral system as a discriminatory system, or one that's not able to be reflective of the population in Compton. So it's not targeting any particular group. It's targeting a method of election that has been challenged over the last several decades in the South, in California, in Texas, as not being favorable toward minority groups. Another a point that I will have to sort of plagiarize from an earlier workshop that was made on this Gonzalez case is that there is an increasing Latino population in Compton, and by creating districts, right now it would open up an opportunity for Latino representation. But as you head into the future with a growing Latino population, who knows, the City of Compton may end up becoming a minority having a minority African American population, and by creating districts, you're able to preserve a voice for African Americans in the future, where they reside.
I think that's important because I don't feel like the groups, the leadership there is really thinking about this from a long-term perspective, and figuring out how can the system be helpful to everybody in the long run. Because I think the direction that the population is going is that African Americans will probably be a minority sooner rather than later in that community, and if there is any interest in preserving that legacy, a district election may be that way.
Yeah, we do, actually, we still have a little bit of time. Did you want to weigh in before? Okay, well, thank you very much, panelists. Great responses. And at this time, we'd like to really open up for about 15 minutes of a Q&A session from the audience. So are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Sure. Just following up on the examples you give about the San Gabriel Valley and the Compton and other cities. You can also look at the South Bay. One of the things that's been discussed here that the Voting Rights Act, the Redistricting Commission has to look at the common interest and ethnic and racial lines, but it's still unclear to me whether that is population just based on the masses or is it the voting population. Because, for instance, in these 4 cities that you mentioned earlier, I happen to live in the city of Alhambra. The population there is about 52% API, yet the voting population of API is about 15%. Just varying by year. 4 years ago, I think it was like 12%. So, is that kind of, and then if you look at that assembly district, it is every single city population-wise is predominantly API. I think there's maybe only 2 cities that are not. But the voting blocks are actually pretty evenly divided between Latino and API. So when looking at common interest and taking those factors into account, what weighs more than the others? Is it just the population? What's there culturally versus the voter blocks?
Well, I have a 2 sort of pronged answer. One is that in California, when you're drawing the districts, all of the districts have to have equal population, and that's based on the total population, whether they're citizens, non-citizens, registered to vote or not. So when you're creating your assembly district in that area, or statewide, they all have to be equal population. But when you're looking at Voting Rights Act, when you're looking at what does the Voting Rights Act require, the standard is that you're looking at citizen voting age population. So when you're drawing the general boundaries of the assembly district, it has to be equally populous with the rest of the assembly districts in the state. But when you're deciding where to draw the lines, if you're using the Voting Rights Act as your top priority, your top criteria, the standard under the Voting Rights Act here in California is that if you can draw a district that has at least 50% citizen voting age, then you, under the Voting Rights Act, you must draw that district.
Yes.
I have a question, I guess it's more directly to the Maldiv case, but I'm interested in seeing how other groups might be supportive of the lawsuit, because I think the dream scenario is that somehow they do this voluntarily or by force, but it creates a domino effect to other cities that have these at-large systems. So I think that's kind of what a lot of people would like to see is, some kind of victory, whether it's legal or voluntary, that then just kind of trickles down to the other districts where, really at-large just doesn't really have a place in our democracy, especially in relatively large cities. So
No, when you say the Maldiv case, are you talking about Compton case?
Yes.
Okay, that's not a Maldiv
Oh,
case.
sorry.
It was brought by an individual attorney.
Okay.
But your point is well taken in terms of using the legal tools that we have at our disposal to, like you're saying, set an example. And California is unique in that it has the California Voting Rights Act. So in addition to the federal Voting Rights Act, we have our own state law that allows us to more easily challenge at-large election systems because you don't have the same number of legal hoops to jump through to prove your case as you do under the federal Voting Rights Act. So, and in fact, if it wasn't for, sort of a lack of resources, MALDEF would be filing more of these California Voting Rights Act challenges to the at-large system. And Joaquin Avila, who's the attorney who challenged the Compton City Council,